What happens when one of the most respected, beloved, and award-winning filmmakers in Hollywood publicly humiliates a royal-turned-celebrity in front of an audience of elite creatives? And does it not with rage, but with cold, surgical precision? When Guillermo del Toro, the gentle giant of cinema, the genius behind Pan's Labyrinth, The Shape of Water, and Nightmare Alley, takes the microphone at a glittering Gotham Film Awards ceremony and unleashes a verbal takedown so devastating it leaves Meghan Markle's Hollywood ambitions in ashes, you have to ask. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Was it personal? Was it calculated? Or was it simply what everyone had wanted to say but didn't dare until now? Let's be clear. This wasn't some internet troll firing shots from a safe, anonymous keyboard. This was a titan of the industry, a man whose storytelling makes grown adults cry, whose creatures feel more human than the humans themselves. A director with no history of cheap shots, no pattern of scandal, no reputation for public feuds. And yet, when he spoke at the 2025 Gotham Film Awards, he didn't just break character. He broke Meghan's Hollywood career. But how did we get here? And why does it feel like the entire entertainment industry exhaled the moment he did it? Let's rewind. It's late November 2025. The air in New York is crisp, the leaves have turned, and the indie film world is buzzing with nervous energy. The Gotham Awards, always a stylish precursor to awards season, is packed wall-to-wall with directors, screenwriters, producers, and rising stars. But this year, the crowd isn't just here for the art, they're watching for drama. Because Meghan Markle, actress, duchess, producer, brand builder, former podcaster, lifestyle entrepreneur, and lightning rod for controversy, is on the guest list. Not just attending, presenting, headlining. Again, some say she was invited as a publicity stunt. Others whisper she pulled strings. There are even murmurs that she insisted on appearing, knowing full well the Gotham Awards typically lean indie serious, not Netflix glossy. Either way, the tension was thick before she even walked in. And yet, there she was, radiant in custom Valentino, gliding into the venue with a smile that said, "I belong here," flanked by a new team of handlers and stylists. No Prince Harry this time. He was out of the country, sources claimed. But few believed it. She posed for cameras. She took her seat. She chatted with a few industry figures, some friendly, some visibly uncomfortable. But the moment that set the internet on fire, the one that triggered over 40 million views on TikTok in under 24 hours, hadn't happened yet. That came when Guillermo del Toro, recipient of a special tribute award for lifetime achievement, stepped up to the podium. At first, it was classic del Toro. Warm, humble. He thanked his collaborators. He shared a funny story about crafting monsters out of papier-mâché as a child. He praised indie cinema's grit and emotional depth. Then, without warning, no change in tone, no dramatic swell, he shifted. He began to talk about what he called an infection in modern storytelling, a hollowing out of meaning, a trend of turning personal trauma into a marketing asset, a culture of celebrity where narratives are no longer earned, but manufactured, where people enter the industry not to tell stories, but to become one. The room went silent, utterly still. He didn't name Meghan Markle. He didn't have to. His words cut like a scalpel. "Some believe the world owes them a second act," he said, staring into the audience. "Not because of talent, not because of perseverance, but because they've been seen and believe that is enough." People gasped. Some glanced toward Meghan. Others refused to move at all. And when their work fails, they blame the medium. They call the audience cruel. They cry that their truth wasn't understood. But cinema is not a charity for broken egos. It is a sanctuary for the brave. It was a moment that will be studied in media schools for years. Because this wasn't just critique. It was indictment. And it came from someone with nothing to gain and everything to lose by saying it. Within seconds of stepping off the stage, the quote had been clipped, posted, shared, debated. Hashtags exploded. Hashtag Del Toro drop. Hashtag Monsters vs. Markle. Hashtag Cinema is not a charity. And Meghan? She sat frozen. No applause. No rebuttal. No witty clapback. The camera caught her blinking rapidly, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. A single shot. A meme in the making. the modern equivalent of a mic drop and a guillotine. Now, let's pause here for a second, because you might be wondering, is this all just Hollywood gossip? Why does this matter? Here's why. In a town built on perception, Meghan Markle has spent years rebranding herself. From supporting actress on Suits to royal disruptor to podcast host to self-proclaimed truth teller, she's meticulously crafted a narrative of being misunderstood, mistreated, and finally, liberated. And for a while, it worked. Netflix gave her a docuseries. Spotify gave her a podcast deal. Publishers fought over her memoir. Magazines gave her covers. Celebrities gave her interviews. But slowly, quietly, the tide began to shift. Spotify cut her loose. Netflix scaled back. Rumors swirled that production staff found her impossible, that creative partners were walking on eggshells, that she demanded control but offered little vision. Then came the failed launches, an animated series canceled before release, a podcast that couldn't find a second season, a lifestyle brand teased but never materialized, and a string of high-profile snubs. No Emmys, no invites to Cannes, no major roles. Still, Meghan persisted, reinventing herself again and again. Shifting from royal to Hollywood, from Hollywood to humanitarian, from humanitarian to entrepreneur. Always pivoting, always pushing the brand. Until Guillermo del Toro, the man whose films give voice to the voiceless and magic to the broken, used his platform to say what no one else had. This isn't art. This isn't bravery. This is noise. And just like that, something cracked. Because when Del Toro speaks, people listen. Not tabloids, not trolls, but real people, creators, gatekeepers, studio heads, critics. He represents the soul of filmmaking. And if someone like him sees you as a fraud, the consequences are catastrophic. This wasn't just a public embarrassment. This was exile. So what did Del Toro really mean? What was happening behind the scenes leading up to this moment? Why did he choose this night, this crowd, this target? And most importantly, what happened next? Because this wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of an unraveling so complete, so brutal, and so public, it left even Meghan's most loyal defenders in stunned silence. Over the next hour, we're going to walk through the full arc. The secret warnings, the studio whispers, the awkward encounters at award shows, the ghosted emails, the live interview that blew everything up, the second speech, the industry blackout, the royal reaction, the final betrayal. You may think you know the story of Meghan Markle's fall from Hollywood grace. You don't. Not like this. Because this time, the monster wasn't on screen. It was standing at a podium, telling the truth. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What happens when the room is full of stars, and suddenly, no one wants to make eye contact? That was the vibe the moment Guillermo del Toro walked up to the podium. Not during the opening of the ceremony. Not at some backstage press conference. But right in the heart of the Gotham Film Awards, in front of every indie director, rising star, agent, publicist, and film critic that mattered in 2025. Let's rewind to that exact moment. A low hum of chatter filled the vast Cipriani Wall Street ballroom. Wine glasses clinked. Laughter bubbled. Cameras swiveled to follow the arrivals. The stage was set for a glittering evening, a celebration of the artistry and grit of independent film. But behind the glamour, tension crackled like static electricity. And it wasn't because of Del Toro. It was because Meghan Markle was there. Now, imagine the irony. She wasn't being honored. She wasn't a nominee. She wasn't even directly affiliated with any of the films in contention that night. But she had been confirmed as a special presenter. Her name, bold and elegant, was slipped into the evening's program without fanfare just days before the event. And the reactions? Mixed at best. Some attendees shrugged. It's the Gotham Awards, not the Met Gala. One screenwriter was overheard muttering. Others were more pointed. What is she even presenting? Trauma as a business model. But no one could deny it. Her presence had re-centered the room's attention. It wasn't about cinema anymore. It was about her. Flashbulbs went off the moment she stepped onto the carpet. Reporters scrambled. Camera phones rose like a forest of glittering arms. Meghan, wearing a sleek, deep sapphire gown and minimal jewelry, looked poised, serene, calculated. She smiled. She waved. She made a beeline for a table near the front and sat directly across from, you guessed it, Guillermo del Toro. Now this is where it gets surreal. Del Toro had arrived earlier in the evening, quietly, flanked by his longtime producer and a few trusted collaborators. He wasn't there to stir controversy. He was set to receive the Gotham Impact Award, a tribute to his decades-long contributions to elevating genre film into high art. But if you knew him, if you understood his deep loyalty to storytelling integrity, you could see it. That flicker in his eye, that subtle tightness in his jaw. He knew what was about to happen. The camera didn't catch their first interaction. It didn't have to. Eyewitnesses seated nearby described it as glacial. No handshake. No nod. Meghan reportedly smiled briefly. Del Toro looked at his drink. Then came the moment. 2 hours into the ceremony, as the crowd grew increasingly tipsy and the speeches a bit too long, the MC took the stage to announce the Gotham Impact Award recipient. The crowd applauded warmly as Guillermo del Toro rose. He walked to the stage slowly, purposefully, not rushed, not showy, but heavy, like a man carrying something he'd been holding onto for too long. The room fell quiet as he approached the mic. The speech began, predictably enough. He thanked his collaborators, praised independent cinema, spoke lovingly of storytelling as the last honest magic we have left. And then, everything changed. He took a breath, and then another, and what came next was ice. Not in tone, not in volume, but in precision. Without raising his voice, without naming names, Del Toro eviscerated what he called the rising trend of trauma exploitation in entertainment. He described how the sacred act of storytelling was being corrupted, turned into a self-serving mirror for those who had suffered publicly and now wished to capitalize on that suffering indefinitely. He said, and I quote, "We now face a generation of content creators who wear pain as a costume, not a scar. They do not tell stories to uplift others. They tell stories to elevate themselves. And that, my friends, is not cinema. That is marketing." A slow gasp rippled through the audience. Some looked at Meghan. Others deliberately didn't. And Del Toro wasn't done. He continued, more calmly than ever. "I have worked with monsters, ghosts, and lost children. And I've learned one thing. The most dangerous story is the one told without humility. The one that demands sympathy, but never earns it. The one that forgets that storytelling is not a stage for ego, but a lantern for truth." You could hear a fork drop. The temperature in the room plummeted. Laughter dried up. Even the bartender in the back stopped pouring. Meghan? Stone still. A few described her face as a frozen smile, the kind you give when you're trying to remember if you're being filmed. Her eyes, though, they betrayed something different. Shock, anger, maybe even recognition. It was like watching a live implosion, one that hadn't fully registered with the victim yet. And here's the twist. Guillermo del Toro never once looked directly at her. Not during the entire speech. Not even as he said his closing line. A line that now lives rent-free in the head of every Hollywood publicist. You may capture attention, but you cannot counterfeit resonance. That is earned. Boom. He stepped away from the mic. No music played. No canned applause. Just a brief, stunned silence, followed by a wave of uncomfortable clapping. The kind you do when you think you're supposed to applaud, but aren't quite sure if it's safe to. He exited stage right. Meghan didn't clap, didn't blink, didn't speak. A Hollywood agent who'd worked with both Del Toro and the Sussex team texted a colleague. Did that just happen? Is that the kill shot? Another producer whispered, that's it. That's the end of her. And outside the venue, reporters were already refreshing Twitter, X, TikTok, and Instagram. As video clips surfaced, captions exploded, and hashtags ignited like wildfire. One user summed it up best. Del Toro didn't throw shade. He summoned a damn eclipse. But what came next? What happened backstage, behind the curtains, and in the hours after the speech, would prove even more explosive. And no one, not even Meghan herself, saw it coming. But by midnight, it had been viewed more than 12 million times. Guillermo del Toro's speech wasn't just a moment. It became the moment, the kind that eclipses the awards themselves. Editors at Variety were already scrapping the next morning's front page. Publicists were on the phone before dessert was even served. And Meghan Markle? She was reportedly ushered out of the venue through a private side door, the kind typically reserved for emergencies, or in this case, PR disasters. But let's talk about the minutes immediately after the speech. Because while the world was still trying to process what just happened, the real fallout was already brewing behind the scenes. According to multiple eyewitnesses, including two seated just one table over, Meghan sat frozen for a full 20 seconds after Del Toro stepped away from the mic. Not blinking, not moving, not reaching for her glass of wine. She was processing, or maybe bracing. Those around her shifted awkwardly. One producer tried to spark a light conversation about upcoming indie projects. Another guest made a joke about Del Toro's monsters finally biting back. Neither attempt landed. Meghan didn't respond. Then, her jaw set. Her fingers curled slightly on the tablecloth. And without saying a word, she stood up. No goodbye, no wave, just a quiet exit. What's more telling? Her chair remained empty for the rest of the night. But that wasn't the end. Backstage, Meghan's team, notably not her usual high-powered reps, huddled in a corner with a Gotham Awards liaison. There were whispers of completely inappropriate, veiled attack, and one particularly telling line overheard by a sound technician. This will not go unanswered. Meanwhile, Del Toro was calm. Too calm, perhaps. He accepted his award with a short backstage interview, graciously praising young filmmakers, especially those who still believe the story is more important than the storyteller. Another line, another dagger. Within 30 minutes, the headlines had begun. Del Toro roasts Hollywood narcissism. Was it a dig at Meghan Markle? Guillermo goes for the jugular. Trauma as a costume. Mic drop of the year. Is Meghan Markle the new Voldemort of indie film? Del Toro doesn't say, but he doesn't have to. Online, it was even worse. Twitter, or X, depending on your level of Elon loyalty, was flooded with reactions. Some defending Meghan, but most? Oh, they were gleeful. Because this wasn't just a celebrity getting roasted. This was a long-simmering cultural moment finally boiling over. For years, people, both inside and outside the industry, had tiptoed around Meghan's Hollywood ambitions. Many respected her attempt to transition from royalty to creative entrepreneur. Others, though, whispered behind closed doors that her projects lacked substance, that her brand-first approach didn't gel with the gritty, personal nature of independent storytelling. But no one dared say it aloud. Until Guillermo. And let's be honest, if it had been anyone else, it might have been brushed off. If a B-list actor or right-wing commentator had made the same remarks, Meghan's team would have slammed them as misogynistic, racist, or anti-royal. Maybe all three. And public sympathy might have followed. But this was Del Toro, a man whose every public action oozes kindness, intelligence, and moral conviction. A man who builds entire worlds out of heartbreak and metaphor. A man beloved by everyone from horror nerds to Oscar voters to Latin American communities. He was uncancelable, and that's what made it so devastating. Because Meghan couldn't fight back the way she usually did. No strategic interviews. No Duchess victim narrative. No Netflix teaser drop. Not yet, anyway. She was caught in the one scenario she hadn't planned for. An enemy with nothing to gain from attacking her, and everything to lose. Yet who spoke anyway. Now, let's talk about the irony here. The Gotham Awards were supposed to be a soft comeback moment for Meghan. After months of being off the grid, a failed cooking show pitch, an abandoned lifestyle line, and the quiet death of her Spotify podcast, the buzz was that she'd begin re-entering the Hollywood conversation. Strategically, safely, with grace. Her appearance at Gotham was meant to signal re-entry. I'm still here. I'm still relevant. I still belong in the room. Instead, she got vaporized in it. And it wasn't just the speech. It was the reaction. Because perhaps the most telling part of this entire ambush was who didn't come to her defense. In the hours after the ceremony, Meghan's usual allies were silent. No tweets from Priyanka Chopra. No Instagram stories from Oprah. No heartfelt quotes from Gayle King. Not even a whisper from the Sussex PR machine. It was radio silence. And that silence spoke volumes. Now, some say Meghan was blindsided. That she had no idea Guillermo harbored such thoughts about her. Others speculate she did know, that whispers of his disapproval had circled for months, especially after she'd allegedly tried to attach herself to one of his upcoming Netflix-adjacent projects, and was politely declined. Still others insist that Del Toro had simply seen enough. Seen the performative vulnerability, the overscripted docuseries, the carefully curated trauma narratives designed more for branding than for storytelling. The endless cycle of self-promotion wrapped in the language of empowerment. And something in him snapped. Something said, no more. So he used his platform, not to rant, not to cancel, but to cut through the noise, with a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. And make no mistake, it landed. Because in Hollywood, perception is reality. And when a revered storyteller calls you out, even in metaphor, it changes how people see you. Overnight, Meghan's image began to rot from the inside. Not from scandal, but from something worse, artistic rejection. She wasn't just unpopular. She was inauthentic. And in the world of indie film, that's career cancer. But if you think the speech was the end of it, you're wrong. It was the start. Because the backlash, the industry whispers, and the attempted counterattack that followed would spiral into something even more destructive. Something Meghan never anticipated. Something that would make her wonder, did I just get blacklisted? And the answer, well, we'll get there. But first, let's look deeper into Guillermo's exact words, line by line, and decode why they struck such a nerve. Because it wasn't just about Meghan. It was about a sickness spreading through the entertainment industry, and Del Toro had just exposed patient zero. What makes a speech legendary? Is it the delivery, the timing, or the sheer audacity of saying something no one else is willing to say? Guillermo del Toro's Gotham Awards speech wasn't planned to be an explosion. It wasn't flashy. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't pound the podium. He didn't even look angry. And yet, it detonated like a cultural nuke. Why? Because behind the soft, poetic phrasing was a scalpel, honed by decades of experience, sharpened by disillusionment, and wielded by a man who rarely, if ever, steps into drama. Let's break it down. Let's dissect the speech, line by line, moment by moment, to understand how a few carefully chosen words ignited the biggest Meghan Markle backlash since Megxit. And let's be clear, this wasn't just a clapback. It was a slow, deliberate unmasking. The crowd didn't know it at first. Guillermo opened warm. Thank you. This means more than I can express. Not because of the award itself, but because of what it represents, the survival of soul in cinema. Classic Del Toro. Humble. Artful. Everyone exhaled. For a moment, it felt like the standard awards speech, a mix of self-effacing humor, gratitude, and quiet wisdom. He name-checked collaborators, shared a charming anecdote about hand-painting eyeballs for a creature in Kronos. The audience laughed, cheered. They were with him. Then, the shift. It wasn't obvious. He didn't clear his throat. He didn't adjust his tone. He simply paused. And when he spoke again, his cadence slowed. His eyes scanned the room. Not frantic, not searching, but weighing. Storytelling is sacred, he began. It is not a tool for self-promotion. It is not a shield to hide behind. And it is certainly not a product line. The first ripple moved through the audience. A few heads tilted. A few brows raised. Guillermo went on. In recent years, we have begun to witness the transformation of personal trauma into personal brand, where pain is no longer something to explore, but something to monetize. The tone was still gentle, but something had changed. He was building towards something. He continued. We've seen documentaries where the subject is also the producer. We've seen memoirs where the ending was written before the first chapter. We've seen creators demand awards not for excellence, but for existence. Now the room was still, not silent. Still, no shifting in seats, no coughing. Everyone was frozen, processing the implications. They knew what was happening. He wasn't talking about Hollywood trends in the abstract. He was talking about someone. And everyone's eyes were drifting to Meghan Markle's table. Guillermo then said the line that became the headline. Cinema is not a charity for broken egos. It is a sanctuary for the brave. A quiet gasp, then a beat of silence, then another. And here's what made it land so hard. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't even angry. He sounded tired, disappointed, like a parent scolding a favorite child for throwing away their potential. That tone, almost mournful, hit harder than rage ever could. Now let's examine the anatomy of that quote. Cinema is not a charity. He's cutting straight into the heart of performative storytelling. The idea that simply having a tragic backstory entitles someone to attention, sympathy, or opportunity. For broken egos, he's not attacking trauma. He's attacking how it's used. He's saying, if your wounds are your currency, and your story is crafted only to sell pity, then you are not a storyteller. You are a grifter. It is a sanctuary for the brave. This is key. Del Toro isn't gatekeeping film. He's defending it. To him, cinema is a space where vulnerability is sacred. But only when it's real. This line alone drew massive applause online, even from creators and artists who typically shy away from controversy. But Del Toro wasn't done, because his most brutal line, the one that truly turned the knife, came next. I have seen the rise of personalities who confuse exposure with empathy, who believe the camera forgives what the heart never examined, who mistake being seen with being understood. Boom. That line. Let's pause. Exposure with empathy. He's calling out the illusion that public vulnerability is automatically profound. The camera forgives what the heart never examined. He's accusing some storytellers, Meghan clearly among them, of skipping the hard work of true introspection, of weaponizing visibility instead of using it responsibly, and then, who mistake being seen with being understood. Oof, that's the dagger. That's the one that sliced through Meghan's public persona like a hot blade through silk. Because if you've followed her journey, that one sentence captures the entire contradiction of her Hollywood reinvention. Meghan has been seen everywhere. Magazine covers, docuseries, podcasts, interviews, speeches, headlines. But understood? That's always been the question. Is she misunderstood? Or did she simply never offer anything real to understand? Del Toro wasn't just critiquing a person. He was indicting a mindset, a philosophy that says, I've suffered, therefore I am owed. A philosophy that says, my story is the substance. And he was saying, in no uncertain terms, that's not enough. Now, let's get into what happened in the room. Because while the speech itself was pure ice, the audience reaction was fire. At first, shock. People froze. Silverware hung in midair. Forks hovered. Wine glasses were set down slowly. You could feel the collective inhale, the mental math of, did he just say what I think he said? Then came the darting glances. To Meghan. To her table. To her expression. Eyewitnesses described her as stone still, unblinking, mouth tightening. One observer told a reporter from The Hollywood Reporter, it was like watching a porcelain mask crack, silently, but visibly. But the wildest part? She didn't leave right away. She stayed seated for at least 5 minutes after the speech ended, trying, it seemed, to compose herself. Her fingers tapped lightly against her water glass. Her breathing was shallow. And then, without a word, she rose. Not abruptly, not dramatically, but decisively. She left behind a half-eaten dessert, an untouched champagne flute, and an entire room of people now whispering behind napkins. Outside the venue, her car was already waiting. Her team, faces tight, jaws clenched, said nothing as they ushered her in. But inside the industry, a different kind of movement was happening. Studio heads were texting each other. Directors were whispering in corners. Agents were wondering, is she finally done? Because Del Toro hadn't just embarrassed Meghan Markle. He had given Hollywood permission to stop pretending, to stop nodding politely, to stop treating her as a serious creative force simply because it was easier than telling the truth. And the truth, now that it had been spoken so eloquently, was burning through every soundstage, writer's room, and executive office from Culver City to Tribeca. But what happened the next morning? When Meghan tried to respond, would only make it worse. Because if Del Toro's speech was a masterclass in precision, her response was a masterclass in self-destruction. Morning hit like a freight train. By 6 a.m., every entertainment outlet from Deadline to BuzzFeed News had dissected the speech. Every quote, every word, every eyebrow raise. The tabloids were more direct. Del Toro destroys Meghan. Guillermo ends her Hollywood fairy tale. Duchess derailed. Gotham's speech goes nuclear. On social media, the hashtags had gone viral. Hashtag cinema not charity. Hashtag exposure versus empathy. Hashtag Del Toro truth bomb. Hashtag Meghan meltdown. And Meghan? She was trending. But not the way she wanted. This wasn't red carpet buzz. This wasn't admiration. It wasn't even controversy that could be spun. It was collapse. She had become the punchline. Memes flooded the internet. One of the most viral? A still of her blank face at the Gotham Awards, captioned, when the director makes a monster movie and you're the villain. Another featured a split screen, Guillermo with his Oscar in one frame, Meghan holding a mock participation trophy in the other. Brutal, ruthless, unforgiving. The response should have been strategic, careful, deliberate, but it wasn't. It was desperate. By midday, Meghan's team had issued a clarifying statement to selected journalists. It was vague, defensive, and weirdly combative. The Duchess of Sussex has always been a champion of authentic storytelling, using her platform to uplift marginalized voices and challenge toxic narratives. While she respects all creators, she believes in using pain to heal, not to harm. That last line, that was a mistake, because the internet immediately interpreted it as a subtweet aimed at Del Toro. And guess what? It backfired. Badly. Writers, actual writers, piled on. Screenwriters began posting side-by-side comparisons of Del Toro's film dialogue versus Meghan's Netflix series voiceovers. Spoiler alert, it wasn't pretty. Independent filmmakers tweeted that they'd kill for 1/10 of Del Toro's wisdom, and resented the implication that Meghan was somehow his moral equal. It wasn't just embarrassing. It was insulting. Worse, it confirmed what many feared, that Meghan saw herself as the real victim. And that arrogance? That inability to step back, absorb critique, and evolve? That was the final straw for many in the industry. Because Del Toro's speech, while sharp, wasn't personal in tone. He never named her. He never accused her of specific sins. He left the door open for self-awareness, for growth, for reflection. But instead of walking through that door, she kicked it down, and Hollywood noticed. Within 24 hours of the speech, Meghan's team began hearing no again. No comment from directors she'd previously courted. No availability from publicists once eager to rep her. No interest from streaming execs who had, until recently, been entertaining pitches. But the biggest slap? A previously scheduled lunch meeting with a female studio president, someone Meghan had been cultivating for over a year, was suddenly postponed indefinitely. The message was loud and clear. Del Toro had said what many had been thinking, and Meghan's response confirmed it. Now let's talk about the psychology of why this landed so hard. In the court of public opinion, people love a redemption arc, but they loathe a perceived manipulator. And Del Toro's speech cut to the core of that distinction. He wasn't attacking Meghan's past. He was challenging her present, her narrative, her behavior, her refusal to grow beyond her own story. He was saying, enough. Stop selling your wounds as wisdom. Do the work. Earn the respect. And when she tried to clap back, it only proved his point. Because her instinct wasn't to reflect, it was to retaliate. She didn't absorb. She projected. She didn't self-correct. She defended. And that's when the industry began to turn. Not loudly, not in headlines, but in boardrooms, in lunch meetings, in whispered text chains between producers and talent reps. The phrase brand risk began attaching to her name like a shadow. And here's where it gets truly telling. Do you know who didn't speak up? Not Harry, not Oprah, not Netflix, not even Archwell, her own company. Nothing, just silence. And in Hollywood, silence is deafening. Because when you become too controversial for your own allies to defend, you're no longer a headline. You're a liability. And liability doesn't get greenlit. Still, Meghan wasn't done. That same evening, she appeared in public, briefly, at a private members-only restaurant in West Hollywood. She smiled. She posed. She wore a smart beige trench and carried a copy of The Artist's Way in her hand, prominently displayed for paparazzi lenses. Message received? Perhaps. But it was too late. The moment had already crystallized. Del Toro had drawn a line in the sand, and Meghan had stepped over it, not with courage, but with delusion. She thought the war was over, but the battle had just begun, because the next chapter wouldn't be waged on Twitter. It would unfold in phone calls, film sets, and studio budgets. And Meghan? She had no idea who was already writing her out of the picture. Once upon a time, she was Hollywood's comeback queen. Not anymore. Because in the days following Guillermo del Toro's devastating speech, and her even more disastrous attempt to respond, the House of Cards Meghan Markle had spent years building in the entertainment industry didn't just wobble. It collapsed. And fast. Let's go back. Not all the way to Suits, not even to the royal wedding, but to 2020. The year Meghan and Harry cut ties with the British royal family and headed to the United States with a suitcase full of ambition and a Netflix deal in the pipeline. Remember the press release? Archwell Productions will build a community through shared experiences, powerful storytelling, and universal values. Sounds noble, right? But dig a little deeper, and you'll find a recurring theme that would soon become her creative Achilles heel. A hunger for control, a fixation on image, and a fundamental misunderstanding of what makes a story resonate. At first, the industry was generous. After all, Meghan had what Hollywood craves: a built-in audience, a global profile, and the fairy tale meets scandal narrative that sells like wildfire. Netflix handed her a multi-million-dollar deal. Spotify followed suit. Book publishers lined up with offers. She was everywhere and nowhere. Because while the press coverage was constant, the content was not. That's where the cracks started to show. Take Archetypes, her much-hyped podcast. The premise was strong, deconstructing stereotypes women face in media and culture. But the execution? Hollow, overproduced, scripted within an inch of its life. Critics noticed. So did listeners. What should have felt intimate, vulnerable, and real came across as rehearsed, curated, and corporate. It lacked the one thing audio storytelling demands: authenticity. And when Spotify pulled the plug after one season, a source reportedly said the show hadn't delivered enough bang for the buck. Translation? It didn't connect. It didn't move the needle. Then there was Pearl, the animated series that was quietly canceled by Netflix. It was meant to be a charming, empowering show about a 12-year-old girl inspired by historical female icons. Sounds great, on paper. But sources from within the development process described Meghan's creative approach as all vision, no structure. She wanted control over every detail, without having the experience to build a workable production pipeline. Meetings turned into lectures. Notes were ignored. Deadlines missed. Eventually, the platform pulled the plug, quietly, diplomatically, but decisively. Add to that a lifestyle brand that never quite launched. A docuseries, Harry and Meghan. That started strong, but drew criticism for feeling overly controlled and self-promotional. And a children's book, The Bench, that, while heartfelt, failed to break through in any meaningful way. Are you sensing a pattern? Because Hollywood was. More and more, the whispers grew louder. That Meghan was difficult. That she micromanaged to the point of dysfunction. That she used collaboration as a buzzword, but had no interest in actual teamwork. It wasn't just ego. It was insecurity. She didn't trust the process. She didn't trust the creatives. She didn't trust anyone but herself. And in Hollywood, that doesn't work. Because this town runs on two currencies: talent and trust. And Meghan's balance was running dangerously low on both. Still, she had defenders, allies, powerful women who wanted to see her succeed. But even they began to falter. One producer, who had championed Meghan early on, confided off the record to a journalist. She talks about empowering voices. But what she really wants is to be the voice. Every project becomes about her. Another exec was more blunt. There's no follow-through. It's all splash and no substance. She doesn't understand that attention isn't the same as respect. And then came the Del Toro moment, the accelerant that turned those whispered frustrations into open declarations. Because when a giant like Guillermo publicly challenges the very ethos of your creative identity, and you respond with deflection instead of introspection, people notice. Meetings got canceled. Options expired. Scripts went cold. She began to receive what one insider called the soft no. Not rejection, exactly, but an endless postponement. We're still looking for the right fit. Let's revisit this in Q3. We've shifted priorities this season. Translation? We're not touching this with a 10-foot pole. And Meghan? She didn't take it well. According to a source close to one of her creative consultants, she was rattled, furious at Guillermo, confused by the silence of her peers, betrayed by an industry she believed had welcomed her with open arms. But here's the truth no one told her directly. Hollywood didn't welcome her. It tolerated her. Because she was shiny, newsworthy, clickable, not because she was respected. And when that shine wore off, when the hype didn't translate into hits, they moved on. This is the part of the story that hurts the most. Because Meghan isn't without talent. She has poise, intelligence, a sharp instinct for headlines. But she lacks the one ingredient Del Toro treasures most: vulnerability. The real kind. Not the Instagram filtered, scripted, PR polished version. The kind that bleeds. The kind that risks embarrassment. The kind that makes a story unforgettable. And Guillermo called her bluff. He stood on that stage and told the entire room, and by extension, the world, that Meghan Markle may have many things, but she's not a storyteller. Not yet. And until she becomes one, Hollywood will keep shutting its doors, one by one. But what no one knew yet, not even Meghan, was that someone else had taken note of her downfall. Someone unexpected. Someone who once stood beside her in solidarity, and was now preparing to walk away in silence. The silence from her inner circle wasn't just unsettling, it was strategic. Meghan had always been the master of the pivot. When one lane closed, she swerved into another. When the media narrative soured, she rebranded. When Hollywood proved elusive, she leaned into philanthropy. And when the palace rejected her, she became the rebel duchess who escaped the institution. But now, every exit was blocked, because no one, not a single major Hollywood name, was willing to take the risk of being associated with what insiders were now calling the Markle brand meltdown. And the cost of staying loyal? It was rising by the hour. Let's talk about someone who had once stood firmly by her side, a name you've heard before. A powerful black female executive at a major streaming platform. She had once publicly praised Meghan as a force for redefining narratives. Their relationship had been both personal and professional. Dinners, emails, whispered plans of an exclusive miniseries highlighting underrepresented women's voices, with Meghan producing, narrating, and, of course, headlining. But after the Gotham Awards? Nothing. No defense. No tweets. Not even a quiet off-the-record comment to the press. And then, a week later, Meghan's team received a short, sterile email. We're grateful for the collaborative spirit in early discussions. At this time, however, we'll be shifting focus to other priority areas. Best of luck with your upcoming ventures. No warmth. No future meeting scheduled. Just a door closing. And that executive? She wasn't alone. More and more names began to drift away. The A-lister actresses who once praised Meghan's courage. The directors who once entertained meetings. The stylists and showrunners and podcast hosts who had once kept her in their orbit. They all began stepping back. Quietly. Carefully. But unmistakably. You see, in Hollywood, the most brutal betrayal isn't public humiliation. It's exclusion. No statements. No articles. No scandal. Just silence. Because silence is safer than association. And Meghan? She was radioactive. But perhaps the cruelest blow came not from the industry, but from her audience. Because while she had once commanded millions of loyal followers who praised her every word, that crowd was shrinking. Fast. Her social media footprint, even via proxies and unofficial accounts, showed a massive drop in engagement. Fan pages went dormant. Fan fiction forums and Meghan-positive subreddits began closing. Even her carefully staged paparazzi outings, the ones meant to project resilience, began drawing mockery instead of admiration. One viral tweet summed it up. She walked out of the palace and into a PR firm. And now the firm just let her go. People weren't inspired anymore. They were tired. Tired of the constant rebranding. Tired of the never-ending victimhood narrative. Tired of the unfulfilled promises, the projects that never materialized, the voices she claimed to uplift that never got heard, the vision that never became real. Even those who wanted to root for her couldn't find a reason anymore. And yet, amid all this collapse, Meghan herself remained defiant, at least in public. She was seen smiling, seen wearing sleek, modern outfits, seen dining with obscure thought leaders instead of A-listers. It was a pivot, again, from Hollywood to humanitarianism, from celebrity to activist entrepreneur. But the industry saw through it. Because this time, the rebrand wasn't backed by power. It was backed by need, desperation. And desperation doesn't attract opportunity. It repels it. One top-tier agent, asked whether they'd ever work with Meghan again, simply replied, she had her moment. It passed. Harsh. Maybe. But in an industry that moves at lightning speed, where optics matter more than truth, and momentum is everything, that sentence is a death knell. Because Hollywood doesn't hate drama. It hates inconvenience. And Meghan Markle, post-Gotham Awards, had become the most inconvenient woman in town. Too famous to ignore, too controversial to support, too unpredictable to invest in. And now, with no major deals, no defenders, and no direction, she was standing at the edge of an abyss she never saw coming. An abyss named irrelevance. And just when it seemed it couldn't get worse, a leak, a private email, from a Netflix executive, circulated among select industry insiders. The subject line? No confidence. The contents? Brief, brutal, and damning. We've concluded that further collaboration with Markle would not serve our goals moving forward. Internal metrics showed declining engagement. PR volatility remains a concern. That leak? It made its way to one journalist, and then to another, and then to the Hollywood Inquisitor, a growing entertainment blog known for publishing what Deadline wouldn't dare touch. They ran the headline, Netflix to Meghan, it's over. And that's when it became official. She wasn't just losing relevance. She had lost it. And with Del Toro's words still echoing, the timing couldn't be worse. Because to the industry, to the audience, to the millions watching from their couches and comment sections, it looked like a verdict. Guilty, not of scandal, not of criminality, but of something even more unforgivable in Hollywood, being a bad investment. And so, the woman who once walked away from the palace in search of creative freedom was now locked out of the only palace that truly mattered to her, Hollywood. But the whispers hadn't stopped, because even as Meghan tried to regroup, rumors were spreading. Someone else was preparing to speak, someone unexpected, someone whose silence had become deafening, and who was about to break it in a way that would send shockwaves through every red carpet, production set, and boardroom on both sides of the Atlantic. They smiled at her, clapped for her, toasted her, but behind the scenes, they were talking, and they weren't being kind. Hollywood is an industry built on illusion, red carpet camaraderie, carefully curated sound bites, fake hugs, tighter smiles. The cameras flash, and everyone plays their role. But the moment those doors close, the masks come off. And when it came to Meghan Markle, those masks had been slipping for a while. The Gotham Awards and Guillermo del Toro's seismic takedown didn't start the resentment. They just made it safe to say out loud. Because here's the thing. People had been biting their tongues for years. They had stories, frustrations, bad meetings, passive-aggressive run-ins. But she was untouchable. The Duchess, the victim, the media martyr. To criticize her was to risk being labeled cruel, or worse, politically incorrect. But now there was blood in the water, and the story started flowing. It began as whispers, off the record, hushed, cautious. But soon, the dam broke. One mid-level producer told a popular podcast, "We had a project lined up." She came in with notes, not on the story, not on the characters, but on how her name would appear in the opening credits. Another writer revealed, she wanted authenticity, but every sentence had to go through 3 publicists and her lawyer. At one point, I wasn't sure if I was writing a script or a brand manifesto. And perhaps the most chilling one? An assistant on a now-scrapped documentary project described her as a one-woman approval committee. Nothing moved forward unless it made her look like a revolutionary, even if it meant cutting more interesting voices out of the project. These weren't random Twitter trolls. These were people who had worked with her, or tried to. People with NDAs. People who were careful. Until now. Because Guillermo had shifted the Overton window. And once that shift happens in Hollywood, it's open season. Let's pull back the curtain. There was a private event, a roundtable dinner hosted by an independent film fund, roughly a week after the Gotham Awards. 20 guests, all industry veterans. The topic? The future of storytelling. But the conversation quickly veered, as it so often does in LA, toward what's broken. And someone brought up Meghan Markle, not as a punchline, as a case study. The phrase that stuck? She represents the rise of the narcissistic narrator. Someone who thinks having a story means they've earned the mic. It was said with such calm conviction that no one pushed back. No one defended. A few nodded. 1 or 2 chuckled, knowingly. That's when it became clear. Meghan Markle had become a cautionary tale. Not because she failed, but because of how she failed. Because she didn't just miss the mark creatively. She misunderstood the culture she was trying to conquer. Hollywood may love drama, but it reveres craft. It celebrates emotion, but demands discipline. And above all, It worships story, real story, not branded messaging. Meghan thought attention was the same as acceptance. But the truth? She never learned the language. Let's get into specifics. Several agents now openly refer to Meghan as a client killer. That's insider slang for someone whose involvement in a project increases the odds of creative collapse. Why? Because she overrides the director. She second-guesses the writers. She insists on brand alignment with every beat of the narrative. One agent explained, the second she signs on, the project becomes about her. It stops being a story and starts being a PR vehicle. And that kills momentum every time. Even more damning? The actors. One anonymous actress, a respected figure known for her indie work, told Film Weekly, it's not that she's talentless. It's that she doesn't listen. She's not curious about other people's stories. She wants the spotlight, not the stage. Harsh. Maybe. True. Painfully. And here's where the contradiction cuts deepest. Meghan always spoke of amplifying unheard voices. But time and time again, those voices were sidelined or sanitized until they served her own arc. The charity workers, the abuse survivors, the women of color in underprivileged communities. They were often brought in as texture, then cut out in editing. Producers began to notice. Audiences began to feel it. Because when you watch something authentic, you know. And when you watch something curated to perfection, you can smell the varnish. And then there was the most damning commentary of all, from within the documentary community. At a private festival screening in Santa Monica, a panel of filmmakers discussed truth in storytelling. One veteran documentarian, who had worked on several Oscar-nominated projects, said this: there's a difference between sharing your story and selling your pain. The former invites connection. The latter demands applause. Guess which one Meghan chose? That quote spread like wildfire in industry WhatsApp groups. Not because it was scandalous, but because it was finally being said. Out loud. Without fear. Without filter. And that's how it snowballs. One person speaks. Then another. Then another. Until what was once taboo becomes consensus. And by early December 2025, the consensus was this: Meghan Markle is not a creator. She's a curator of her own myth. And that myth? It's no longer marketable. But the biggest twist? While Meghan faced a growing wall of silence from Hollywood's power players, one name had yet to weigh in. Someone who had once handed her the biggest spotlight of her life. Someone who had helped craft her image as a truth-teller. Someone whose silence now felt almost strategic. Oprah. But more on that soon. Because before Oprah stepped forward, or didn't, someone else had something to say. Someone who'd worked with Meghan, trusted her, bet on her, and had the emails to prove it. But by midnight, it had been viewed more than 12 million times. Guillermo del Toro's speech wasn't just a moment. It became the moment, the kind that eclipses the awards themselves. Editors at Variety were already scrapping the next morning's front page. Publicists were on the phone before dessert was even served. And Meghan Markle? She was reportedly ushered out of the venue through a private side door, the kind typically reserved for emergencies, or in this case, PR disasters. But let's talk about the minutes immediately after the speech. Because while the world was still trying to process what just happened, the real fallout was already brewing behind the scenes. According to multiple eyewitnesses, including two seated just one table over, Meghan sat frozen for a full 20 seconds after Del Toro stepped away from the mic. Not blinking, not moving, not reaching for her glass of wine. She was processing, or maybe bracing. Those around her shifted awkwardly. One producer tried to spark a light conversation about upcoming indie projects. Another guest made a joke about Del Toro's monsters finally biting back. Neither attempt landed. Meghan didn't respond. Then, her jaw set. Her fingers curled slightly on the tablecloth. And without saying a word, she stood up. No goodbye, no wave, just a quiet exit. What's more telling? Her chair remained empty for the rest of the night. But that wasn't the end. Backstage, Meghan's team, notably not her usual high-powered reps, huddled in a corner with a Gotham Awards liaison. There were whispers of completely inappropriate, veiled attack, and one particularly telling line overheard by a sound technician. This will not go unanswered. Meanwhile, Del Toro was calm. Too calm, perhaps. He accepted his award with a short backstage interview, graciously praising young filmmakers especially those who still believe the story is more important than the storyteller. Another line, another dagger. Within 30 minutes, the headlines had begun. Del Toro roasts Hollywood narcissism. Was it a dig at Meghan Markle? Guillermo goes for the jugular. Trauma as a costume. Mic drop of the year. Is Meghan Markle the new Voldemort of indie film? Del Toro doesn't say, but he doesn't have to. Online, it was even worse. Twitter, or X, depending on your level of Elon loyalty, was flooded with reactions. Some defending Meghan, but most? Oh, they were gleeful. Because this wasn't just a celebrity getting roasted. This was a long-simmering cultural moment finally boiling over. For years, people, both inside and outside the industry, had tiptoed around Meghan's Hollywood ambitions. Many respected her attempt to transition from royalty to creative entrepreneur. Others, though, whispered behind closed doors that her projects lacked substance. That her brand-first approach didn't gel with the gritty, personal nature of independent storytelling. But no one dared say it aloud. Until Guillermo. And let's be honest, if it had been anyone else, it might have been brushed off. If a B-list actor or right-wing commentator had made the same remarks, Meghan's team would have slammed them as misogynistic, racist, or anti-royal. Maybe all three. And public sympathy might have followed. But this was Del Toro, a man whose every public action oozes kindness, intelligence, and moral conviction. A man who builds entire worlds out of heartbreak and metaphor. A man beloved by everyone from horror nerds to Oscar voters to Latin American communities. He was uncancelable, and that's what made it so devastating. Because Meghan couldn't fight back the way she usually did. No strategic interviews. No Duchess victim narrative. No Netflix teaser drop. Not yet, anyway. She was caught in the one scenario she hadn't planned for. An enemy with nothing to gain from attacking her, and everything to lose. Yet who spoke anyway. Now, let's talk about the irony here. The Gotham Awards were supposed to be a soft comeback moment for Meghan. After months of being off the grid, a failed cooking show pitch, an abandoned lifestyle line, and the quiet death of her Spotify podcast, the buzz was that she'd begin re-entering the Hollywood conversation. Strategically, safely, with grace. Her appearance at Gotham was meant to signal re-entry. I'm still here. I'm still relevant. I still belong in the room. Instead, she got vaporized in it. And it wasn't just the speech. It was the reaction. Because perhaps the most telling part of this entire ambush was who didn't come to her defense. In the hours after the ceremony, Meghan's usual allies were silent. No tweets from Priyanka Chopra. No Instagram stories from Oprah. No heartfelt quotes from Gayle King. Not even a whisper from the Sussex PR machine. It was radio silence. And that silence spoke volumes. Now, some say Meghan was blindsided. That she had no idea Guillermo harbored such thoughts about her. Others speculate she did know, that whispers of his disapproval had circled for months, especially after she'd allegedly tried to attach herself to one of his upcoming Netflix-adjacent projects, and was politely declined. Still others insist that Del Toro had simply seen enough. Seen the performative vulnerability, the overscripted docuseries, the carefully curated trauma narratives designed more for branding than for storytelling. The endless cycle of self-promotion wrapped in the language of empowerment. And something in him snapped. Something said, no more. So he used his platform, not to rant, not to cancel, but to cut through the noise, with a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. And make no mistake, it landed. Because in Hollywood, perception is reality. And when a revered storyteller calls you out, even in metaphor, it changes how people see you. Overnight, Meghan's image began to rot from the inside. Not from scandal, but from something worse, artistic rejection. She wasn't just unpopular. She was inauthentic. And in the world of indie film, that's career cancer. But if you think this speech was the end of it, you're wrong. It was the start. Because the backlash, the industry whispers, and the attempted counterattack that followed would spiral into something even more destructive. Something Meghan never anticipated. Something that would make her wonder, did I just get blacklisted? And the answer, well, we'll get there. But first, let's look deeper into Guillermo's exact words, line by line, and decode why they struck such a nerve. Because it wasn't just about Meghan. It was about a sickness spreading through the entertainment industry, and Del Toro had just exposed patient zero. What makes a speech legendary? Is it the delivery, the timing, or the sheer audacity of saying something no one else is willing to say? Guillermo del Toro's Gotham Awards speech wasn't planned to be an explosion. It wasn't flashy. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't pound the podium. He didn't even look angry. And yet, it detonated like a cultural nuke. Why? Because behind the soft, poetic phrasing was a scalpel, honed by decades of experience, sharpened by disillusionment, and wielded by a man who rarely, if ever, steps into drama. Let's break it down. Let's dissect the speech, line by line, moment by moment, to understand how a few carefully chosen words ignited the biggest Meghan Markle backlash since Megxit. And let's be clear.